Have you ever wondered about the secrets hidden within your own family? What if the person you thought you knew best, the very foundation of your world, was hiding a past so profound, so dark it could shatter everything? Imagine a life built on seemingly solid ground, only for a single whisper, a dying breath, to reveal a truth that changes everything. Today, we dive into a story that begins in the sterile silence of a hospital room, where a daughter sits by her mother's deathbed, expecting grief, perhaps a final word of comfort. Instead, she receives a mystery, a single, unfamiliar name, whispered from the brink of eternity. A name that will unravel decades of meticulously constructed lies and plunge her into a world of danger and betrayal she never knew existed. This isn't just a tale of family secrets. It's a chilling journey into the depths of identity, survival, and the shocking power of a past that refuses to stay buried. Get ready, because once you hear this story, you'll never look at your own family history the same way again. The air in the room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and fading hope. It clung to the heavy velvet curtains, to the crisp white sheets of the hospital bed, and most profoundly, to the silence that had settled between Elara and her mother, Eleanor. For as long as Elara could remember, their relationship had been a study in quiet detachment. Eleanor, a woman carved from granite, rarely showed emotion. Her life had been a series of precise, measured movements, each word chosen with surgical care. Elara, in her late 30s, had long ago stopped trying to chip away at that stoic exterior. She'd learned to live with the chasm, accepting it as an unchangeable truth of her existence. Their suburban home, with its manicured lawn and perfectly aligned photo frames, had always felt less like a sanctuary and more like a meticulously curated museum of unspoken feelings. But now, as Eleanor lay dying, the silence was different. It wasn't the familiar, comfortable quiet of indifference. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a final frontier. The monitors beside Eleanor's bed pulsed with a rhythmic, impersonal beat, a stark counterpoint to the erratic drum of Elara's own heart. Grief, Elara realized, wasn't just a tidal wave. Sometimes, it was a slow, agonizing drip, each drop eroding a piece of you hadn't even known was there. She watched her mother, a fragile silhouette against the dim light, wondering if there would be any last words, any final gesture to bridge the decades of distance. Would Eleanor finally soften, finally offer a glimpse into the woman she truly was, beneath the layers of carefully constructed reserve? The nurses moved with practiced grace, their whispers like hushed secrets in the sterile environment. They spoke of vitals, of comfort, of the inevitable. Elara simply sat, her hand resting lightly on her mother's frail, cold one. It was a gesture born more of duty than affection, a silent acknowledgement of the impending end. She remembered fragmented moments from her childhood. Her mother meticulously organizing a bookshelf, her precise calligraphy on birthday cards, the way she would always pull her hand away when Elara tried to hold it for too long. Eleanor had been a creature of habit, of order, of a life so perfectly contained that it felt almost unnatural. There were no spontaneous hugs, no whispered bedtime stories, no tearful confessions. Just a pervasive sense of control, a quiet determination that bordered on obsession. And then it happened. A tremor ran through Eleanor's hand, a sudden, almost imperceptible twitch. Elara leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. Eleanor's eyes, clouded with age and illness, fluttered open. For a fleeting moment, a spark of something fierce, something almost desperate, flickered within them. A sound escaped her lips, barely audible, a ragged breath struggling to form a word. Elara strained to hear, her heart pounding against her ribs. The nurses paused, their movements stilled, sensing the profound significance of this final moment. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a word of love or regret. It was a name, a single, distinct, utterly foreign name. Silas, Eleanor whispered, her voice a fragile wisp of air. Then her eyes glazed over, and the spark vanished. The monitors let out a long, mournful beep. The room, which had briefly held the promise of a revelation, plunged back into an even deeper silence. Elara stared, uncomprehending. Silas. Who was Silas? She'd never heard the name before. Not once in all her 37 years. Her mother, who had meticulously catalogued every single receipt, every family photo, every insignificant detail of their lives, had never uttered this name. It hung in the air, an invisible, unsettling presence, a discord in the carefully orchestrated symphony of Eleanor's life. It felt like a misplaced puzzle piece, flung carelessly into the serene landscape of her perceived reality. A chilling thought began to crystallize in Elara's mind, slowly at first, then with an accelerating dread. Her mother, the paragon of order and meticulousness, had held onto a secret so profound, so personal, that it surfaced only in her final, gasping breath. It was a secret that felt heavier than the grief itself. It wasn't just the death of her mother. It was the death of the mother Elara thought she knew. This final, cryptic utterance had shattered the carefully constructed facade of their shared history. She remembered fleeting, unsettling moments from her childhood that she had dismissed as childish imaginings. The way her mother would sometimes stare out the window, a distant, haunted look in her eyes, as if seeing something Elara couldn't. The locked antique chest in the attic, always off-limits, with a stern warning against touching it. The nervous tension that would sometimes ripple through the house when certain topics were mentioned, the old town her mother grew up in, a distant relative no one ever spoke of, or the mysterious circumstances surrounding her maternal grandfather's early death. Elara had always rationalized these as quirks, as remnants of an older generation's privacy. Now, they felt like breadcrumbs leading into a dark, forgotten forest. Her father, Robert, a man of quiet habits and predictable routines, entered the room, his face etched with a familiar, weary sadness. He saw Elara, still grasping her mother's hand, and gently put an arm around her shoulder. He too was a man of few words, and his grief, like his marriage, was a silent affair. Elara wondered if he had heard it, that one single whispered name. She wanted to ask him, but the words felt too fragile, too dangerous to utter in the sacred solemnity of death. What if he didn't know? What if he did and had chosen to keep it buried, just like her mother? The thought was a bitter, uncomfortable pill to swallow. It painted a new, unsettling picture of her parents' seemingly conventional marriage, hinting at a hidden undercurrent of unspoken truths. The funeral was a blur of polite condolences and hushed eulogies. Elara nodded, smiled weakly, and accepted platitudes, all while the name Silas echoed in the chambers of her mind, a discordant melody. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a burgeoning obsession. It was the desperate need to understand this final, enigmatic act of her mother's. What kind of name, what kind of person, could break through Eleanor's formidable reserve in her last moments? It felt like a riddle, a challenge thrown across the veil of death. As she stood by the graveside, watching the coffin being lowered, a profound sense of isolation washed over her. She was an only child, and now, with her mother gone, a part of her history had vanished into the earth. But another part, a much larger, more unsettling part, had just begun. The whispered name had opened a door, or perhaps a Pandora's box, and Elara, against her better judgment, felt an irresistible pull to step inside. The perfectly manicured lawn of her life, once a symbol of stability, now felt like a fragile veneer, concealing untold depths. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life, as she knew it, had just irrevocably changed. The woman she thought was her mother was now a stranger, and the whispered name was the key to unlocking a past more complex and potentially terrifying than anything she could have ever imagined. The days following the funeral blurred into a haze of obligatory thank yous and the unsettling quiet of a house suddenly too large, too empty. Elara tried to resume her routines, to find solace in the familiar rhythm of her job as a graphic designer. But the name Silas had burrowed deep into her subconscious, a persistent, unsettling hum. It was a phantom limb, an absence that felt more present than anything else. She found herself staring at old family photographs, scrutinizing her mother's face for clues, for any hint of the secret she had carried. The stoic expression, the reserved smile, They now seemed less like personality traits and more like carefully constructed masks. Her father, Robert, remained a silent enigma. He moved through the house like a ghost, his grief a private, unshared burden. When Elara tentatively brought up her mother's past, he would deflect, his eyes distant, his answers vague. "Your mother was a private person, Elara," he'd say, his voice flat. "Some things are best left undisturbed." This only fueled Elara's nascent paranoia. Was it grief or something else? A complicity she couldn't yet fathom? The first real clue came not from conversation, but from a tangible object. While clearing out her mother's meticulously organized study, a room Elara had rarely entered beyond childhood curiosity, she found a small, ornate wooden box tucked away in the back of a rarely used desk drawer. It wasn't locked, which struck Elara as odd, given her mother's penchant for security. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender, was a single, yellowed photograph. It showed a young woman, strikingly beautiful, but with a wildness in her eyes that Elara had never seen in her mother. And beside her, a man, tall, dark-haired, with an intense gaze. His arm was casually slung around the woman's waist, a possessive gesture that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. The back of the photo was blank, save for a faint, almost erased pencil mark, a single looping S. Could this be Silas? The possibility sent a jolt through her. The man in the picture was undeniably handsome, but there was an unsettling quality about him, a hint of something dangerous beneath the charming smile. Elara felt a prickle of unease. Her mother, the woman who had lived such a sheltered, predictable life, had known a man like this? It seemed impossible. Yet here was the proof, undeniable and chilling. The photograph led her down a rabbit hole of obsessive research. She started with her mother's maiden name, looking up Old Town records, high school yearbooks, anything that might connect Eleanor to a Silas. It was a slow, painstaking process. Her mother had grown up in a small, forgotten town in rural Pennsylvania, a place so obscure it barely registered on modern maps. The local library, when Elara finally tracked it down, was a dusty, forgotten relic, run by a kindly but technologically challenged librarian. It was there, buried deep within the archives of old newspapers, that the pieces began to click into place, horrifyingly. An article from over 40 years ago, dated 2 years before her mother had met her father, screamed across the brittle page. Local woman vanishes after tragic accident. Search continues for Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne. The name reverberated in Elara's mind, cold and sharp as a razor blade. The article detailed the disappearance of a young woman named Clara Jensen, who had vanished after a car accident that killed her fiancé, Silas Thorne. The police suspected foul play, but the body of Clara was never found, and Silas Thorne, despite being the victim, was also a person of interest due to his controversial past and connections to local underground activities. Elara's breath hitched. Clara Jensen. The woman in the photograph with her mother was named Clara Jensen. But it was her mother. The resemblance was uncanny, undeniable. The same high cheekbones, the same distinctive birthmark just above the left eyebrow. It was Eleanor, but Eleanor's maiden name was Eleanor Vance, not Clara Jensen. And her mother had always said she'd grown up in a different town, a bland, unremarkable place with no history of scandal. A cold dread seeped into Elara's bones. Her mother wasn't just private. She was a ghost. She had lived under an assumed identity. Everything Elara knew about her past was a lie. The realization was a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and disoriented. The woman she had just buried wasn't Eleanor Vance at all, or at least not entirely. She was Clara Jensen, a woman who had vanished decades ago, entangled in a tragedy involving a man named Silas Thorne. The article painted a picture of Silas that was far from charming. He was a charismatic but troubled figure, known for his involvement in underground poker games and petty criminal enterprises. He had a reputation for charming women, then leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty wallets. The accident itself was shrouded in mystery. A remote stretch of road, a car found overturned, and only Silas Thorne's body identified. Clara Jensen had simply vanished. Elara felt sick to her stomach. Had her mother, Clara been in love with this man? Had she been involved in his shady dealings? Or was she a victim, forced to disappear to escape something far more sinister than a mere accident? The questions swirled, each one more terrifying than the last. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just by her mother, but by the very foundation of her own life. Who was she if her mother was a phantom? She dug deeper, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through digitalized archives, searching for any mention of Clara Jensen or Silas Thorne. The trail was faint, almost erased by time. There was a brief mention of a police investigation that went cold, a few speculative articles suggesting Clara had simply run away, unable to cope with the loss. But no one had ever found her. No one had ever connected the dots between Clara Jensen and Eleanor Vance. Until now, the sheer audacity of it all was staggering. Her mother had built an entirely new life, a meticulously constructed facade, and had maintained it for decades. Her marriage to Robert, Elara's birth, their quiet suburban existence, all built on a foundation of sand, on a lie. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty library. It was the chill of a profound loneliness, a sudden, terrifying realization that the woman who raised her was a stranger, an enigma, perhaps even a fugitive. She packed up her research materials, the old newspaper clippings, the photograph of Clara and Silas, and left the library, the weight of the discoveries pressing down on her. The mundane world outside, with its cheerful shoppers and bustling traffic, felt utterly alien. How could life continue so normally when her own reality had just been shattered into a million pieces? As she drove home, a new, unsettling thought surfaced. If her mother was Clara Jensen, and Clara Jensen had vanished after a car accident involving Silas Thorne, then what if Silas wasn't dead? What if the body found wasn't his? Or, even more chilling, what if he was alive, and her mother's final whisper wasn't just a memory, but a warning? The possibility sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The mystery was no longer confined to the dusty annals of the past. It was bleeding into her present, threatening to engulf her. She was no longer a curious daughter. She was a detective, thrust into a cold case that suddenly felt dangerously hot. And at the heart of it all was a man named Silas, a name whispered from a deathbed, now taking on a sinister, living presence in her mind. The revelation of her mother's true identity, Clara Jensen, and her connection to the vanished Silas Thorne, had ripped Elara's world apart. The house, once a symbol of her quiet, predictable life, now felt like a mausoleum of lies. Sleep offered no escape. Her dreams were plagued by fragmented images of old newspaper headlines, the intense eyes of the man in the photograph, and the chilling echo of Silas. Her father, Robert, remained her biggest obstacle. Every attempt to discuss her discoveries met with a wall of quiet evasion, a deep-seated reluctance that bordered on fear. It was clear he knew something, perhaps everything, but was terrified to speak. The turning point came not from more research, but from a cryptic message. An anonymous email sent to an old, rarely used account of her mother's that Elara had somehow gained access to. The subject line was simply, "He's still out there." The body of the email contained only an address in a remote, run-down part of the city, and a single, ominous warning, "Be careful. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just about her mother's past anymore. This was a living, breathing threat. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they were hinting that Silas Thorne, the man presumed dead for decades, was alive. The idea was absurd, terrifying, and utterly compelling. She knew, instinctively, that going to that address was reckless, could be a trap. But the alternative, living with the gnawing uncertainty, the half-truths that choked her, was unbearable. She drove to the address on a cold, gray afternoon, the kind of day that seemed to mirror the turmoil in her soul. It was a dilapidated warehouse, tucked away in a forgotten industrial district. Graffiti marred its brick walls, and broken windows stared out like empty eyes. The air was thick with the scent of decay and desperation. As she approached, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley. He was old, his face deeply lined, but his eyes held a sharp, knowing glint. He looked familiar, unsettlingly so. "You're Clara's daughter," he rasped, his voice gravelly. "I knew you'd come eventually." Elara froze. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped into the dim light. "My name is Arthur. I was Silas's partner, his confidant, and your mother's protector." The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Silas's partner? Her mother's protector? The puzzle pieces, once scattered, were now snapping into place with terrifying speed. Arthur began to speak, his voice a low, steady rumble, weaving a tale that shattered every remaining illusion Elara held about her family. Silas Thorne, he explained, was indeed charismatic, but also a dangerous psychopath. He ran a sophisticated ring of scams, preying on the vulnerable, and had a ruthless streak hidden beneath his charm. Clara, Elara's mother, had been young, naive, and deeply in love with him. She'd been drawn into his world, initially blinded by passion, then trapped by fear. The accident wasn't an accident at all. It was a botched assassination attempt on Silas, orchestrated by a rival group he had double-crossed. Clara had been in the car with him. "They thought Silas was dead," Arthur explained, his eyes fixed on Elara. "But he wasn't. He was badly injured, but he survived. And he made Clara promise to help him disappear, to create a new life. He was obsessed with her, you see. A sick, possessive kind of love. He saw her as his property." Elara felt a wave of nausea. Her mother hadn't just run away. She had been forced to fake her death, to abandon her identity, all for a man who had manipulated and controlled her. "Your mother tried to leave him many times," Arthur continued, his voice tinged with regret. "But Silas always found her. He threatened her family. He threatened to expose her, to ruin her new life. So, she stayed hidden, living in fear, always looking over her shoulder. She married Robert, a good man, because she hoped it would offer her some protection, a shield. But Silas, he was always there, a shadow in the periphery. The truth was a bitter pill. Her father, Robert, wasn't just complicit in the lie. He was a silent co-conspirator, driven by love and a desperate need to protect his wife. He had lived with the secret year after year, the unspoken fear a constant presence in their home. The locked antique chest in the attic, the hushed conversations. They weren't just quirks. They were the physical manifestations of a life lived in terror. "When your mother whispered his name," Arthur said, his voice dropping, "it wasn't just a memory. It was a final desperate plea. Silas found her again, not long before she got sick. He wanted something from her, something she refused to give. And he promised he'd come for her, or for anyone she cared about, if she didn't comply." Elara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a historical tragedy. It was a present danger. Her mother's death wasn't just natural causes. It was the result of a life lived under an unbearable, constant strain, exacerbated by a renewed threat. Silas Thorne was not only alive, but he had recently terrorized her dying mother. And now he might come for her. What did he want? Elara asked, her voice trembling. Arthur hesitated, his gaze shifting uneasily. He wanted something precious, something only your mother knew how to find. A stash of money, diamonds, something they'd hidden decades ago, after a big score. He always believed she knew where it was. He thought she had double-crossed him. The pieces clicked into place. The whispers, the sudden illness, the desperate whisper of his name. Her mother had known Silas was coming. She had known her life was ending, and in her final moments, her last act of love and protection for Elara was to give her a warning, to arm her with the name of the monster. "He's coming for you now," Arthur stated, his eyes piercing. "He knows Clara had a daughter. He knows you're looking for answers. He thinks you know where the stash is." Elara felt a sudden, dizzying panic. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing, a game that had started decades before her birth. Her mother, in her dying breath, hadn't just revealed a secret. She had passed on a deadly inheritance. "What do I do?" Elara whispered, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. Arthur reached into his coat and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. "Your mother kept this. She wanted you to have it if something ever happened to her. It has everything. The truth about Silas, about the stash, and a plan. A way to finally stop him." Elara took the journal, her fingers tracing the worn cover. It was her mother's elegant handwriting on the first page, the same precise calligraphy she remembered from birthday cards. But this time, the words weren't bland well wishes. They were a raw, desperate confession, a chronicle of a life lived in terror, and a final, desperate plea for her daughter's safety. Her mother hadn't been stoic. She had been terrified, living a double life to protect her. And now, it was Elara's turn to face the monster her mother had spent a lifetime running from. The truth had finally been unveiled, but it came wrapped in a shroud of danger, promising a confrontation that would redefine her very existence. The journal was a window into her mother's soul, a harrowing account of fear, resilience, and a love so profound it transcended even death. Clara Jensen, the woman Elara knew as Eleanor Vance, had meticulously documented her life with Silas, his manipulative charm, the constant threat he posed, and the terrifying realization that she was trapped. The hidden stash, Arthur had revealed, was not just money. It was a collection of illicit diamonds, worth a fortune, hidden in a remote cabin Silas owned, a place only Clara had known the precise location of. This cabin, the journal detailed, was also where Silas had stashed incriminating evidence against powerful figures he'd blackmailed over the years, his ultimate insurance policy. The journal outlined Clara's desperate plan. She had always known Silas would eventually come for the diamonds. She had planted false leads, spread rumors, and even meticulously altered old maps to obscure the true location. Her final entries, written in a shaky hand, revealed her agonizing decision to reveal Silas's name to Elara. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to arm her daughter with the truth, knowing it would put Elara in danger, but believing that ignorance would be an even greater threat. Her mother's love, Elara realized, wasn't absent. It had been expressed through a lifetime of silent protection and a final act of calculated risk. The confrontation with Silas was inevitable. He had made contact, a chilling phone call to Elara's home, his voice a low, smooth purr that sent shivers down her spine. He knew she had the journal. He knew she was looking for the stash, and he wanted it. He threatened her father, Robert, promising to make him pay for his complicity. Elara, armed with the knowledge from the journal and Arthur's grim warnings, knew she couldn't outrun him. She had to face him. Arthur, a man who carried the heavy burden of a past he couldn't escape, reluctantly agreed to help. He felt a deep loyalty to Clara, a quiet respect for her resilience. Together, they devised a plan, using the detailed information from Clara's journal. The cabin was miles away, deep in the wilderness, accessible only by a winding, treacherous road. It was the perfect place for a final showdown. The journey to the cabin was fraught with tension. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every distant sound echoed like a warning. Elara felt a surge of her mother's own strength, a fierce determination she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just a graphic designer from the suburbs. She was Clara Jensen's daughter, ready to face the ghosts of her mother's past. Silas was waiting for them at the cabin, his charisma still intact, but now laced with a predatory menace. He was older, his face etched with cunning and ruthlessness, but the intensity in his eyes was unchanged. He had lived in the shadows for decades, a master of manipulation and survival. The air crackled with unspoken threats and decades of buried secrets. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Silas, convinced Elara held the key to his fortune, demanded the location of the diamonds. Elara, using the misinformation her mother had carefully crafted, led him on a wild goose chase, deliberately misdirecting him, buying time. Arthur, positioned strategically, ensured their escape route was clear. The journal, Elara realized, was not just a historical document. It was a weapon. As Silas grew increasingly frustrated and violent, revealing the full extent of his depravity and his long-standing obsession with Clara, Elara saw past the charm to the monster beneath. He wasn't just after money. He wanted control to reassert the power he believed he had over Clara. This was about more than diamonds. It was about a lifetime of terror. In a climactic struggle, Silas attacked. Elara, guided by a primal instinct, fought back, using her wits and the element of surprise. Arthur, stepping in at a crucial moment, subdued Silas. The diamonds, as it turned out, were not in the hidden compartment Silas had been searching for. They were where Clara had always intended them to be. Long gone, liquidated years ago, their value donated anonymously to a charity for victims of domestic abuse. Her mother hadn't been a victim. She had been a survivor, meticulously dismantling Silas's power, one calculated step at a time. The real treasure was not the diamonds, but the freedom she had carved out for herself, and eventually, for her daughter. Silas, defeated and exposed, was finally apprehended. The evidence from the journal, coupled with Arthur's testimony and the location of Silas's hidden records in the cabin, ensured his downfall. The weight of decades of terror was finally lifted. Elara returned home, not to the same house, but to a place transformed. Her father, Robert, embraced her, tears streaming down his face. The truth, though painful, had finally freed him too. Their relationship, once built on silence and unspoken fears, could now begin to heal, founded on honesty and a shared understanding of their extraordinary past. Elara chose not to live in fear. She rebuilt her life, her design work now imbued with a newfound depth and purpose. She often visited her mother's grave, not with the old sense of bewildered detachment, but with a profound understanding and respect. Eleanor Vance had been Clara Jensen, a woman who lived a life of unimaginable courage, protecting her daughter with every breath, even her last. The whispered name, Silas, had been a warning, a legacy, and ultimately, a path to liberation. The story of Clara Jensen, the woman who vanished and then reappeared as Elara's mother, became a testament to resilience, the enduring power of truth, and the complex, often hidden, sacrifices parents make for their children. It was a story that needed to be told, not whispered in the dark, but brought into the light. And as I reflect on this incredible journey Elara took, spurred by a single, dying whisper, I can't help but think about the secrets we all carry, the untold stories that shape us, and the courage it takes to confront them. If this story resonated with you, if it made you question the quiet corners of your own history, then please, give this video a like, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the human experience, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the mysterious and the profound. What secrets might be lurking just beneath the surface of your own world? Perhaps it's time to find out.